Welcome to Richer Souls, Sharon Spano. It's great to have you join us today.
Thank you so much, Rocky. It's wonderful to be here.
And I'm excited to learn from you today. We always like to start at the beginning. What was it like when you were growing up, and how much did your family and school teach you about money?
It's such a great question. I grew up in the inner city of Los Angeles, and let me back up for a second. My parents divorced when I was very, very young. My father was in construction, and we were taken to live with my paternal grandmother in a house with aunts and my aunt, uncle, and other children. So there were several. And we really, I would have to say that we didn't have a lot of money, but I don't think we knew it. It wasn't a big deal. Like, we walked around talking about how poor we were. We had when I lived with my grandmother, she was quite an extraordinary woman. She had 9 children. She was one of 9 children. She was the last child. So she was a survivor. I mean, she just knew how to make things happen. So that's what I remember. But I also know that it wasn't easy. Things were not easy. We just didn't know there was anything other than our way of life. So to answer your deeper question, we didn't talk about money because there really wasn't anything to talk about. So I didn't learn a lot about money. One thing that I remember is my dad being in construction when he would come in and visit and stay for the weekend. It was easy to get money from him, which was one of probably the worst things I learned. So I learned that I could leave him a note on his bed, and he'd leave me $10 or $20 if I had a field trip or something like that. And I'm embarrassed to say it's a habit I still have, that when I'm leaving town, my husband is the one to remind me I need cash because I don't think about it. He'll say, "You need money, and here's money." So I didn't particularly learn how to manage it. I didn't really learn that it was important even to earn it or how to keep it. Fortunately, I married a man who knew all those things, and he's taught me those things along the way.
What about school? Anything with school?
Well, I grew up in Catholic school. And so the thing there, and part of the reason that I did the research that I did around how people experience time and money is, we get those from those early childhood experiences. So you're wise in asking that question. But when you're in Catholic school, at least in my day, what you learned was the Pharisees were the guys with all the money, and they were bad people. And oh, by the way, they killed Jesus, and you don't want to be like them. And so with that message, whether it was direct or not, that was my interpretation as a child. You develop scarcity thinking. And then my mother, who I didn't really connect with till I was much later in life, I was already married really when we started to rekindle our relationship. My mother's favorite word was cheap, and she had a very strong bias about people that had money. And it seemed to her everybody had money but her. So that added layers and layers to my scarcity mentality because my husband and I were successful, and we acquired the houses, the cars, and all that. And of course, my mother never truly. It's an interesting thing because parents are funny in that they'll brag about you to their friends, but then somehow manage to shame you in their own way about your lifestyle, as in, why do you need all this kind of thing? Because she was from the Depression where you saved tinfoil and you didn't waste anything. And we looked to her, I think, in our early marriage years as two people that were and we were, to many, I would own it, the poster children of consumerism because we were making the money and we were living the life. So a lot of mixed messages there. And I see this a lot with people that I work with.
When you were making the money and living the life, were you financially savvy, or you were just spending what came in?
No, because my husband is naturally very wise about money, and because we kind of balance each other out because he comes from abundance and I come from scarcity. So I'm more frugal in many respects. I'm one that worries a little bit more about the future and what's going to happen. And he's one that comes from the mindset of we'll just create what we need. And he's done that. And, we've both done that in our careers in our own way. So it was never a frivolous life. We weren't just because we also had a son with a very rare metabolic disorder. Our son was born with this disorder, and he was disabled and in a wheelchair. So we had to be extremely responsible about our resources.
Did you clash over money, or not so much the money itself, but the beliefs over the money?
I think we still do because he teases me a lot because I worry, but I'm also like nice things. And so I'm not going to quibble if, it's time for a car something that I want. But I also know that, we have things in order for our life and our future. And that's very helpful. And right now, our son passed away in 2008. So it's a different life for us in that you don't have the same level of concerns when you have children, as you probably know, particularly a child that's ill, and you never know what that cost factor could look like from one day to the next. So there's a certain amount of freedom at this point of our lives where we're privileged enough to live and have two different homes, one in Florida, one in North Carolina. And we're just enjoying life, and we travel and we work hard because we both still love our work, and it's balanced out. But I would say in our earlier years, it might have been more challenging because I worried, and he would always be like, we're good, we're good. But I want to see the data, show me the numbers, So
So, what got you into the money space?
it's such a great question, Rocky, because what I started to see with my clients and even in the people that worked for me and my husband's company was they either had a lot of time and no money or a lot of money and no time. And that was very curious to me. I'm not really in the money space. I'm in the human behavior space. So my work is in human behavior. And I was curious to see how people experienced money based on their stage of human development. We know that from the research, there are 12 stages of human development. And so when I wrote the book, The Pursuit of Time and Money, that is what I explored was based on your stage of development. How do you experience time and money? And I was very intentional in wanting to bring the two together because we have a lot of books on time. We have a lot of books on money, but they're two of the most important resources. We are making literally dozens and dozens of decisions every moment of our day based on whether or not we have enough time and or money or perceive ourselves to have enough time and money. And I just thought it was an interesting topic because it's so much a big part of our stressor as well.
And honestly, in the world of psychology, so to speak, it was not a subject, money specifically, that probably was well studied, and probably until about the 1990s that it started to become studied. And it's only now that it's much greater depth and understanding of how people behave with money. And it's kind of funny because we all spend our whole lives going to school and making money, but none of us know how to use it well, in a sense.
Right. And how to keep it, or even if we have an abundance of it, how to enjoy it and how to live a fulfilling, meaningful life in the context of it. I have a faith tradition, and you may be familiar, as many are. And if we look at the biblical scriptures, the wisdom of those scriptures is quite amazing. And money is mentioned over 2,000 times in the Bible. So that tells me that, the wisdom, even way back to the beginning, over 2,000 years ago and beyond, those individuals, and if we believe as Christians do that the scriptures are God breathed, and even God, the divinity, knows this is a major factor and why so many of us struggle and get into trouble in life.
Well, it's funny because you talked about how you were taught about money and behavior in school, and it was a religious school. And yet, when you look at the Bible, there's that conflict there too,
Right.
of that in the labeling that occurred.
Yeah, it's fascinating because when you think about the orders, and the Catholic, whether it be Catholic or otherwise, I mean, there's so much about celibacy and, living a life of poverty as Jesus did and all of these kinds of things. But a lot of that, I think, is just traditions that have come down through the ages. I mean, if you read the scriptures, Jesus really was more about abundance than scarcity. So I don't know where the Catholic Church picked all of that up or if that was just my interpretation, but it was certainly the way it was interpreted in my family. Again, people with money are not necessarily good people. And it's taken me a lot of years to get past that mythology.
So, what inspired you to write the book, The Pursuit of Time and Money?
Well, as I said, I was curious about human behavior in those two constructs, and particularly from the lens of human development. And one of the things that we saw, Rocky, that was so interesting that I often talk about is I didn't expect to really look at scarcity versus abundance, but it became so clear that people in the earlier stages, because they're more concrete in their thinking, their experience of time and money is very different from people in the later stages. So for instance, they're more about the chasing of time and money, where people in the later stages are more about abundant thinking and maybe how can I use my resources to solve world hunger, to better out humanity. They're not so much in the chase for their own sake. I always like to point out, though, scarcity is fairly obvious, abundance is fairly obvious. What was most fascinating to me was the moderate scarcity, moderate abundance, because the key factor that showed up was responsibility. Both categories are operating from what they deem to be responsible behavior. They're saving perhaps for the future. The difference is the moderate scarcity is coming from a fear-based decision making way of thinking, where the moderate abundance is thinking about things in more of that creative, innovative way. And the example I like to use is a gentleman that I interviewed who he was saving for the future, actually lived in Orlando where I live, but never took his kids or his family on vacation. And because he was saving for retirement, which was about 25 years out, someone in abundance would not behave in those ways or think in those ways. They'd be saving, but they'd also be enjoying the trip along the way.
I think that's where a lot of people get stuck,
Mm-hmm.
is that middle ground of you can save and you can enjoy together. They're not mutually exclusive.
Exactly. Exactly. It's really that non-dual thinking capacity. And you asked me earlier about conflict with my husband. I'm just remembering when my son was 14 years old, my husband had a business situation that occurred where a big joint venture effort that he was deeply involved in was embezzled out from under he and his partner. So we had to go into litigation, and there was a period there. And he came to me and he said, "Let's take a trip across the country." And it was summertime, and we'll take Michael and we'll start out in San Francisco. We'll just take our time and we'll drive across the country so he could see as much of the country as possible. And my first response was, "Oh my God, we can't afford that now. You're out of work, and how are we going to take that time and spend that money?" And his response was, "We'll never have this unique time with him. He's at the age where he still wants to be with us. That could change. I have time that I've never had, and we'll do it and make it work." And we did. And in retrospect, it was one of the most important things we ever did, because, then our son passed away, as I said. So that time that we had together as a family, and I think we were gone, I'm not sure I even remember, maybe 8-10 weeks. When my son was critical, he was talking about and remembering the moments and the places that we visited. It was very, very heartwarming and really affirmation that we had done the right thing to create memories for all three of us. So, these are the kind of things that come up where we think not enough time, not enough money. We have to make decisions. And the two of us didn't agree, but I was so happy that I aligned with his perspective because it was very important for our family.
And then I think that's the other part of it. People don't realize that there is a time for everything, and especially with kids, right?
Right.
You only get essentially 18 years. The first 6 are, you taking care of them. Then you get, more towards the funner years. But as they get older, even before the 18 years are up, they've got their own interests and their own busyness. And so if you don't make those times, and then from a health standpoint, depending on where we as the adults are, can we do those types of things? The older you get, the harder it is to do certain types of
Right.
things. So those doors open and close, but it's abstract. And just like money is abstract. And so I think it's hard for people to really wrap their hands around it. And the problem is you get one life, and by the time you figure it out, it's kind of late to go
It's
fix it,
gone.
right?
Yeah.
It's gone.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that was the other reason I wrote the book, was just thinking about how abstract time and money both are, even though we think about them and talk about them as though they're concrete, but they're really not. I mean, depending on where you live, how you were brought up, the time zone you're in. I mean, there's so many factors, which I think is what makes it so complicated. And then we're changing, we're developing, we're morphing, to your point. We're aging. And we were just saying, this summer, for whatever reason, up here in the mountains, has gone so quickly, and we're all feeling that, and we don't know why this summer feels faster than any other summer, but it does. You just have these kind of internal experiences that make you feel, I either need to slow down or I need to speed up, when really I think the joy and the beauty of fulfillment is just being where you are in that moment and doing the best you can with the decisions you make.
That is so true. Now, have you looked at other parts of the world and how they behave?
No, I really haven't. I mean, when we put out the surveys, we did it mainly here. I wrote a little bit about it in the book just because I was in South Africa while I was writing it. and noticing. I think, we're all aware that in some of the really hot, warmer climates, people tend to move a little bit slower. And I saw that when I was on the way to South Africa when we were laid over in Dubai. There was an urgent, what we would call in the United States, an urgent moment with a flat tire in a transportation vehicle. And they just took their time, and they're all standing around talking about it and assessing the situation. The Americans in the bus were stomping up and down, freaking out that they were going to miss their flights, and nobody cared. And I just chuckled to myself because I thought, yeah, it's true that, when you're in different environments, different cultures, time is valued in different ways. And there's something to be said for that. The Italians say what is it? They don't live to work, or they don't work to live like we do. They work to live. And so I know it's out there, but I haven't personally studied those factors and how it plays out. But in the terms of human development, that is universal. And so we know, that people develop in specific ways, and they do experience time and money, as I said, accordingly.
It's funny because in the US, for a lot of people, work is a 4-letter word. And yet it doesn't have to be that way. You can have fun and create the work that brings you joy and find places to do that. But yet people kind of feel like they're stuck, I think, where they don't realize they have the ability to choose where and how they earn money.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I was just on with a client who feels very stuck in his work, and we're working on shifting that perspective to one of gratitude, because he also has health issues that, might prevent him from being in other environments. And I think that it's just interesting to think about how people, particularly in the United States, I think we have this idea of, oh, I got to work really hard and then so I can retire. But what is retirement? I mean, you really have to have a clear vision of what that's going to be for you. What are you going to do? Because otherwise, and I see this often, people retire and they're not really clear on what life is going to look like after that. And then they're bored and incomplete and unfulfilled. And next thing you know, they're just sitting around waiting to die, kind of thing. And it's like, if you enjoy your work or where you are and what you're doing, why retire? I mean, just do it differently. You can reinvent how you do this third chapter or third act of life if you want. Not everybody has those options. I understand that, but so much of it is perspective and really leaning into and defining what it is I want my life to be about. That to me is an abundant mentality.
And it took me a while to figure out how to do it, but now I have no desire to retire because I'm like, the work kind of is part of my day, part of my fun, provides structure
right
around getting everything else done that I want to. And it creates an outlet.
Yes.
Creates a bit of meaning, and I don't do the parts I don't want to. I do the parts that I want to, and we get to control that. But yet I see a lot of people really struggle with it.
Well, and again, I think it all depends so much on your financial resources, and I took up golf like 3-4 years ago, which was insane for me to do at this stage of life. But I needed the activity, and I've always wanted to play and never had the time. And so now was it. And it's been interesting for me. Like you're saying, I had to reinvent and learn, how do I put this into my life and still do the work I want to do? And it's taken me a good several years to figure that out. But I find that when I take that time away from work, I'm even more productive. There's more and more research that says that we need to be doing that more effectively. I understand the research, but I wasn't always very good at doing it myself because I love working. But when we can commit, and that's why, it goes back to the old days when Stephen Covey and guys like him were preaching mission statements. I still really work hard with my clients to create that mission statement, because it's more about purpose than just the work, going to work and earning that dollar every day. It has to be a fulfilling life. And there's so many ways to make that happen, even if you're stuck, I believe, in the drudgery of a job you don't like right now. Like with this client I was just speaking with, there's a lot of obstacles in his way of getting to where he wants to go, but they'll never be overcome if we can't dream it, talk about it, put it in perspective to the systems in which he's living, because my work is all about the systems. And then what does that mean? in terms of his executing on those dreams.
And that's a big part of it. I'm a big fan of Parkinson's law, which basically says time and money will expand and contract to whatever's allocated.
Right.
So, if you need to play golf today, time will expand for you to play golf. And if you're saying, I don't want to play golf, time will contract and something else will fill up your time every day. And the same goes for your money. Whatever you have, well, at least in America, more gets spent than,
Yeah. Yeah.
but learning to control it.
Yeah. And how you think about it, because I think if you're not really thinking about those resources as resources, and really, so much of my work is helping people witness and developing awareness of awareness. So we started this conversation, looking at the thought and behaviors that came out of early childhood, which I would say is a worthwhile discussion for anyone out there who has issues around either time and or money. But having awareness of when is this showing up for me, if it is a scarcity mentality. And then once I have the awareness and I start to see the patterns in my own system, then that gives us the ability to have awareness such that we can make different choices. And even if you're stuck, even if you don't have the resources, particularly in this country, I still want to believe that we are the land of opportunity. So you don't have to live according to the culture or the mythologies or the belief systems or even the values of your ancestors if they're not serving you or the greater good. I work a lot with my clients to help them be the change maker of those systems. So if you come from poverty, if you come from a family that doesn't appreciate education, or you see, that discrimination is blocking your ability to move forward, then what are the thought patterns that I'm contributing to that? And then the behaviors that I'm contributing to that? And how can I be an interruption to all of it?
Does that awareness then go into other parts of life? Like when you see people finally get control of their time and their money, do you see them start to control other parts or reanalyze or analyze other parts of their behavior in their life?
It's such a great question. It can be, it's a, which comes first, the chicken or the egg? But one thing that I really know from the work that I've done is how we utilize our time and our money directly impacts our relationships. Because we're sending a message to our children if we don't have time for them or if we're not going to invest in them. So what I see is the generational poverty mindset of scarcity, for instance, where maybe I'll use an example. My child wants to play soccer, but I'm living in scarcity and I'm saying, even if I have the resources, because I do see this, we're not going to spend money on those things. Well, what are you telling your child? You're telling your child you're not worth it. And I work with adults every single day who don't believe they deserve or are worth it because of messages that were sent to them by their parents, because their parents lived in scarcity. And you can be poor. I remember being in Costa Rica some years ago, and literally people had, dirt. Their houses were on dirt, no foundation, cows coming down the road. And when I first got there with my American mindset, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, these people are suffering. They're so poor. They need this, that, and the other. We need to help them. We need to come in. But then after being there a week or so and then going back, what I realized is these are really happy, fulfilled people. Not all of them. They just didn't need a Mercedes in every driveway. They had their families, they had their food, they had their culture, their rituals. So to me, I wrote in the book about radical abundance. And radical abundance is about being comfortable and fulfilled in your life, no matter what the circumstances are. Because sometimes we have more money, sometimes we have more time, sometimes we don't, we have limited of both. So radical abundance is about knowing wherever I am content. And at the same time, again, going back to non-dual thinking, I am looking for the patterns that might be holding me back and keeping me from having the best possible life.
And I think this is where some of the charity work causes trouble, is when giving hurts. So you take your example, you're trying to create them to live a lifestyle like we do, and it's just probably not necessarily possible there just because of income and so forth. But at the end of the day, you're taking them from happiness to unhappiness. Now you're creating these cultures of comparison and other issues that they never had to deal with. They just enjoyed life and had
Right.
fun, but we're trying to help, so to speak, and we're causing more trouble.
Yeah, we want to make them like us. But, I had the same experience in Sri Lanka. I went there to an orphanage, and the happiest children I think I've ever seen. And many of them were orphans from that huge tsunami that we had so many years ago. And then they had also a separate area for women who were widowed because in their culture, they're ostracized when they're widowed. And so we go into the orphanage, and it was lovely. But I'm seeing it again through the American eye, thinking, oh my gosh, they need computers and they need this and they need that. And no, they didn't. They were joyful and well cared for and well loved. And I really think that Americans need to travel a little bit more to understand how different cultures can be happy in the middle of what we would call dire poverty, but to also understand that there are places that really and truly people are suffering. I mean, I certainly saw that in the shanties of South Africa. And one, it makes you more grateful for what we have here in terms of our society, but it also, I think, opens your heart to know, because that was another thing I looked at in the book was perspectives on generosity. So in the scarcity mindset, I may give every week at my church or to the local charity, but I do it begrudgingly, or I do it to look good, which is very different from an abundant mindset that will give regardless if whether I have it or not.
That it is. You talked about the different stages of development and how they affect our beliefs around money. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Well, as I said earlier, like the different stages experience it differently. The first four stages are fairly obvious because they're birth to adolescence. We don't typically talk about the stages of development in terms of age because in the later years, they're not necessarily correlated to age. It's more about consciousness, perspectives, worldviews. But in the earlier stages, and we've all been through that, we're chasing time and money. We have a lot on our plate, excuse me. We're trying to earn, we're trying to achieve, we're trying to get the car, the house, whatever. That experience in the early stages, particularly at the achiever stage, is about goal orientation. Most people in the United States, about 68%, land at either the fifth or sixth stage, expert or achiever stage, and they never get beyond that. And there's nothing wrong with that. But what I want people to know is that each stage is meaningful and fulfilling if you're living your most robust experience of life. Often when people find themselves dissatisfied or unhappy, or they're hitting a wall, or now I want a divorce, or I want to burn my business down, it is many times because they're leaning into a later stage of development. And those motivations are changing. So what we see as people move into those later stages, as I said, is their experience of time and money also shifts. I want more time maybe for spiritual development. I want more time to be with my family. I don't want to be at the office all the time. I want more time for travel. I want to spend my money on humanitarian efforts. So the perspective changes. And again, it doesn't necessarily correlate with age. It can, but often people in their later ages or their later stages and ages of life, they can still be very superficial, if I might sound judgmental for a moment, and just want to spend it all on themselves and gain more and more and more. Greed, greed, greed. Again, we don't like to talk about the stages in terms of being right or wrong. But what I do encourage my clients to understand is if you're feeling dissatisfied, it's worth exploring. Am I leaning into another stage of development? And is there something more I need to learn about myself through that process?
And that's a big part of it. It's all essentially what you said is always learning about ourselves and then asking, are we happy with where we're at? And do we want to do something about it? And then actually taking action on it
Right.
and doing something about it. And I think that's the part that most people don't do. They don't take action, do they?
Well, they don't know what to do. All they know, when people come to me, they know I talk about it as the emptiness of success. And that can look like a lot of things, but often they're high achievers. They may be CEOs or entrepreneurs who built companies and they've made the money and are still making the money, but they're not happy and they don't know why. They're disconnected maybe from their children. They've gone through a divorce. There's a million reasons, but they know they're stuck. They know they're in pain, but they literally don't know what to do about it. And that's why it's so important to have, I think, whether it's a therapist, a coach, a mentor, someone that understands human behavior and what it means to move through these life transitions to help you. I mean, I'm not a therapist. My training is in human and organizational systems. My PhD is as I said, in human behavior in those systems, but also I am very much had a lot of training on trauma. So sometimes we have to look back a little bit, not get stuck in the trauma, but just enough to make sense and meaning of how it is that we got here. One of the things that's been so interesting for me to observe is that many of our high achieving leaders are catapulted to achieve because of early trauma, and not necessarily the capital T trauma, although I've seen that, but sometimes, just poverty or immigration. There's a host of reasons of why people are motivated to be high achievers. But then again, they get to that pinnacle and it's not what they thought it was going to be. And that's where we have to do more work to help them start to step into greater and more fulfilling choices and opportunities.
That makes a lot of sense. Why do you think so many people do achieve financial success, but then struggle to achieve life? I'll call it life success, but it's really not life success. I don't know what the right word to say. They're thrilled living their life, basically. They're enjoying it.
Yeah, I think, again, if we're caught up in the early stages of just achieving for the sake of achieving, it can also become like an addiction. And, I need more, I need more, I need more. I was in a retreat all last week and I read a pamphlet that I had been carrying around in my briefcase forever by Leo Tolstoy. And it's a parable or a story that he wrote, obviously the turn of the century. And the title is How Much Land Does a Man Need? And it's a beautiful story about this man who started out with nothing. And then he acquired a little bit of land and then he wanted more and more and more. And then he sold all the land to move to somewhere else to get more land. And he goes on and on and on. And there's never enough and never enough. And then he finally comes to this place, this magical place that someone told him about where you can get all the land you want. And when he gets there, these Cossacks or whatever they are, because it's obviously in Russian terminology, say you can all the land you want. It's only 100 rubles a day. And he's confused by that. So what do you mean a day? He said, we're going to give it to you, all the land you want, but it's 100 rubles for how much land you can walk and carve out in one day. So he thinks, wow, this is great. Well, he's so eager and crazy about the thought of how much he's going to get that he doesn't sleep all night. And he gets up at the crack of dawn and he's got his water and his food and everything. And he starts walking and he keeps walking and walking and walking till he can no longer see them on the horizon. Then he decides to turn left and he's going to walk that piece out. And the next thing you know, he's just so greedy with how much land he can get that now he's too far out. But he has to be back by sundown or he loses the money and the land. That was the deal. And he makes it. He literally runs the last few feet, yards, whatever, and drops dead. And as only Tolstoy could do, I'm not doing it justice, but it's a very striking example of particularly, I think, where we are in the Western world, where there's never enough. And so, after a while, I think people just get tired. We're hearing so much about burnout in today's world, and you've done it, but now you've got to keep that machine running. You're on the hamster wheel, and you've got to keep that running until I believe you stop and take stock of your life and really do the deep reflective work and really ask the hard question. And that's where I think sometimes people need help is what is it that I really, really want? And what is the price I'm willing to pay? We don't know how to make those different choices. And I don't think any of us can do it alone. I mean, I think we have to have someone holding up the mirror to help us see what it is that's really going on within us.
You've talked mostly about the first four stages. What are the rest of the stages?
Oh, I don't know that I remember them all by heart anymore, but
Well, I don't want specific, but like the general theme.
yeah. So the general theme is then you start moving into more abstract thinking. So after the achiever, we have a pluralist, which is more of an individualist perspective. And then it goes on up a few others that I don't remember exactly. It's been so many years now that I'm construct aware is like the 10th straight stage. And the universal lumen state is the 12th stage. That's where someone like, we have very little research on those people, but we do have research. That might be, just to use an example, though we don't know for a fact, that might be where a Gandhi would be at a 12th stage. A Jesus would be probably beyond that, that kind of a thing. We don't see many of those people in the workforce at the very, very latest. But I myself am now at the 10th stage. And I'm only there because of the work I've done as a result of grief around my son. I didn't work to get there. Achievers always want to know how to get there. It's not like that. It's that as you do the work and you develop more awareness and you start to have shifts in consciousness, you can move to the later stages. And I didn't even know that it had happened until I took an assessment some years ago, and I was kind of surprised. But I knew I had changed internally. I knew I was at a different place in terms of making decisions about my work. I don't want to be in an airplane 150, 200 weeks out of the year, those kinds of things. I knew I didn't have the same material desires that I did when I was younger. So a lot of things shifted, particularly after my boy died. Your perspective just changes. And then, I did the assessment and I was later stage. But that doesn't mean, this is an important piece, Rocky. We have to do the work because we can move to the later stages, and we talk about everything transcending and including. We can bring that shadow work with us. We could bring greed with us and be at later stage. So that's the point of doing the deeper work on ourselves, so that even if we develop to later stages and different ways of being, we are as whole and robust as possible.
How do you see this affecting your clients who are business owners? Do they behave differently with money in these choices versus others, or what are their unique struggles to them?
Yeah, what I see is, and it doesn't always happen overnight, but one of the greatest compliments I got from one of my clients on Father's Day was, "I'm a better father because of your guidance." A lot of times men in particular, because it's been this way for ages, think my job as a father is to provide. They're doing all that and they're enjoying their kids, but maybe not as tuned in as they could be. And then they wake up, and I see this a lot. My kids are 19, 20, 25, and I don't really know them. They don't really know me. Now they don't have time for me because, they have their own lives. So what I see is more of what I call an integrated approach to life. They're still working, they're still achieving. They got to keep that machine going. They've got responsibilities and obligations, but they're also carving out more time to be with the ones they love. This same gentleman just got back from a week in Hawaii, and he took the whole family. And when I checked in with him, he said we had probably the best time ever. And they're a strong family. They didn't need me to enjoy their Hawaiian vacation, but I think he probably was more present in ways that he might not have been otherwise. Because we know we go on vacation now, we're still checking our phones, our emails, our texts, And I spend a lot of time with high achievers, helping them recalibrate those kinds of behaviors so that they can be more present with the people they love and care about.
No one's going to care about them at the places they left behind.
That's right.
Nobody remembers you at work or your business after you're gone.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
And that's the reality of it. But we don't always seem to act that way. And I think people don't realize, especially with kids, what you do at 2, 3, 4, and 5 is what shows up at 12, 13, 14, 15.
Exactly.
You're modeling those things at a very young age. And so if they don't see it, that's where they end up. You also have another model that looks at interior versus exterior.
Yeah, that's Ken Wilber's famous Aqua framework, and was a part of my dissertation. It blends with the adult human development work, and it's very interesting because it looks at the interior and the exterior of who we are as human beings, as well as how we show up in the collective and then the larger systems. And so what I really took on more than I really should have, this should have been 3 volumes, this book. That's part of the problem of being at the later stages, is you tend to connect a lot of ideas and it's complicated. But what I wanted to see there was, if I were living from integral consciousness, which is how we talk about it, how would time and money look in each of the 4 quadrants? How do I plan? How do I spend? So the first upper left is, what do I believe? And then upper right is, what are my behaviors around it? And then lower left is, how am I in the collective about money? And then the right is, how am I in terms of the systems around money? That's how I'm remembering it. I wrote that book a while ago, Rock. So I'm trying to recall. But these are things that are just other frameworks that I find so interesting, and they're ways that I kind of map out my own decisions and choices that I make that are very useful.
You wrote the book a while ago and you've worked with a lot of clients. What are some of the surprising things you've kind of learned since the book came out?
Well, the research that I've kind of shared with you that the book is based on really has been more and more obvious to me as I work in deeper ways with clients. The ways that people are impacted by the ancestry is kind of the biggest news that obviously isn't in the book because that's come to me in the later work. Seeing how literally, those frameworks that we have had inoculated in us, if you will, from the early childhood experiences, good or bad, have formed how we live out those choices. It's just fascinating to me because I see it so consistently.
How hard is it to break those patterns?
It's very difficult because they're ingrained in us. As I shared my own story with you, I mean, I still live with a lot of that. The difference is I have awareness of it when it shows up in the moment so that I can make different choices. But I'm constantly remembering those voices. Those voices are there. And I see that with my clients. But obviously they don't often have the awareness of why. So like I had a client that had some issues, and this is a scarcity thing that's often not known or recognized, where he tends to overeat. And when you see that, sometimes there's a variety of reasons, but he likes to be the guy that picks up the check and demonstrate nice meals, and he enjoys other people. He's a very hospitable, generous man, and all of those are beautiful things. But then underlying that was kind of this hunger, if you will, that when we got into the deeper work came from the fact that he didn't have a lot when he was younger, and food was a thing. I mean, I grew up with that. We didn't have good lunches, to take to school, and all the other kids are eating in the cafeteria and you can't afford to. So those are the kind of things that leave an imprint on us. And again, we move on, we get over them. But then they rear their ugly heads sometime in our 50s or 60s, and we go, "Oh, okay, now I get it." But rather than making it a wrong thing, I always have my clients go, just notice without judgment. And then what can we glean from that so that we can start changing the behaviors?
Well, it's all essentially programmed into us
Mm-hmm.
through life.
Yeah.
And if you don't upgrade your programming, then you're running on old systems that no longer serve you or no longer fit in your current lifestyle. But yet there you are stuck with it. And so,
And passing them on.
yes.
That's the thing that I want my clients to be an interruption to it, because you don't even realize the things you say that come from the ancestry that you're passing on to your own children.
Well, it's funny because when I'm out and talking to people, I can hear the words they say under their breath, so to speak. I mean, they say them out loud, but if you listen for them, you get a very clear picture of people's relationships with money.
Mm-hmm.
And,
It's
it's just
fascinating.
interesting.
It is interesting. And it's not, again, it's not a judgment thing. To me, it's just something to be aware of, and an observation. And then if it's deep rooted, in things, where, I've seen this where people have real issues with their parents around money or time and what was given or not, then there's healing work to be done. And, that's another piece that I do in a different way, but that can be very, very freeing, so that you can step beyond the emptiness of success and really truly enjoy what you have or what you don't have, depending on the circumstances.
So, how do you do that healing work?
Well, I am trained in something, it's a long conversation, but it's called constellation work. And it is research based. Everything I do is research based. And where it's a way that we look at what is going on in the system, whether it's organizationally or a family system. And there's a specific way that I'm trained. I have I think 4 certifications now in this process. It's been so meaningful to work with clients in a way that we can see what the patterns are in the system, in a way that allows them to recognize where they might change behaviors. And it's really kind of hard to explain because the work is kind of at a quantum physics level, even though it's concrete at the same time. But we see dramatic shifts when people engage in that process. And I'm very proud to be able to offer that as one of the resources in the work that I do.
That sounds rather interesting, and I don't think we've ever talked about that, but you're saying it works at the quantum level. Could you I'm not looking for an in-depth, but, like, kind of like, how does the layperson even understand what this is and whether it
Yeah.
applies?
Yeah. Well, think about it this way. I'll bring it down to just kind of a concrete example. Everything is energy in the universe. I mean, I think we all know that. Subparticles on up, my desk here at some level is subparticles in energy. We as human beings exude energy. And so when you're looking at a system, there's energy in the system. And so we're exploring that by way of this process. I like to use a kind of a common example. We all, in the United States, we have Thanksgiving and we have our ritual around Thanksgiving. And so let's pretend that you've had the same type of ritual for years and years with your family. Same members come, we have the same traditions around food and football and whatever that is, and we have a great time. But then one year, Aunt Myrtle shows up, and Aunt Myrtle's this negative force. She complains about everything. And no sooner are you at the table and she's complaining the turkey's dry and your kids are too fat and your wife doesn't know how to bake a decent pie. And Aunt Myrtle has the power to change the whole energy in that system from the moment she walks in the door. And so these are things that are happening all the time, and we're in and out of these systems, if you will, and we're picking up energy from one another, and we're making choices and decisions about how we're going to interact. So when we do a constellation, we always have an issue that we're exploring to start with. I did one today where the gentleman wanted to explore a specific opportunity that he has in business. And then we bring in what we call elements into the system. And then I'm trained to facilitate the client through that process so that they can see whatever they see. Sometimes they don't see anything, but most of the time, again, we're building it in a way that they can see things at a concrete level, as I said, but also experience it in their gut. They're literally like, if I say, tell me where you're feeling that right now, what's coming up for you? What are your thoughts and feelings? They'll share a thought. I'm feeling sad or angry, where I feel it in my heart. I feel it in my throat. I feel it in my chest, whatever. And so it is hard to explain in this context here that we're in today. It's something you have to experience.
How well received is it by people?
Very much so. Before COVID, we only did these in live situations. When COVID hit, one of my clients, or one of my colleagues, I should say, in Austria, developed an online platform. It's not as powerful as in person, but because it's online, particularly with my high achievers, they can get it pretty quickly, because think of it like a chessboard, and I'm bringing in the elements. I might bring in a representative, like a little chess piece that represents you, or we might bring in an abstract piece that looks like anger or fear, and they see it right away, even if they don't feel it in their gut, because it is concrete and visible in that respect. It's a pretty cool thing. I do it in all of I have something called Potential Unleashed. That's a 12-week intensive that I do with clients, and many will, up for several rounds of that, but we always do at least one or two constellations in that process. And then I do them individually if people request, to do one to just kind of explore something. Usually people need more than one, but it depends on the issue that they're facing. And the reason, Rocky, that I got into it, quite happenstance, was I met a woman in Europe. There are no accidents, right? And it was when I was in the grieving process around my son. And she took me through a constellation that was so powerful and healing for me. I then went to Europe, to London, to be trained myself. And that's where I've gotten all these certifications, because I saw the power and felt the power of it firsthand. And it was just a tremendous, I had several layers that I went through, obviously, but it's a very useful tool to explore.
And I think a lot of times it is through those down moments in life that we're open to change and that opportunities present themselves. And then from that, you actually get to help a lot more people. And so it becomes a positive in that sense as well.
Well, the path of human development, as I've described it to you briefly, the 12 stages, one of the premises that we teach is we grow and have the potential to lean into later stages based on how we make meaning from life circumstances. Because that's really all life is. It's a series of circumstances. Some are great, some are not so great, some we have control over, most we don't. And it's how we make meaning. If I did not have the training and development that I had for the loss of my son, I wouldn't have been able to move through it. But I was preparing because he was born with a disability. So I was in some ways blessed to have the time to prepare for the inevitable. And how I made meaning after that. Am I a victim? Am I angry? There's no right or wrong because grief will be what it is. It's different for everybody. But my point is the meaning making. We're meaning making machines. That's how we're designed. And the thing is that our thoughts aren't real. We can choose them in a moment.
And we get to create the meaning we want, right?
Exactly.
It's a reflection of
Yeah.
what we've built.
Exactly. The challenge is we can get stuck, and that's where we need support to help us reframe some things when needed.
And that makes a lot of sense. What's one truth about success you wish more people understood?
That's a tough one, but I would say it's only really meaningful if you're able to bless others with your success.
Yeah, there's a lot more in giving versus receiving.
The world needs us to be successful, but it also needs us to care and be abundant in our giving and care for others.
And that's true. What's one lesson that cost you a lot but was worth every penny?
Hiring the wrong person at the wrong time cost me a fortune of time and money, but I learned so much about myself and human behavior as a result of that period in my life.
I've always said that business is actually a self-development journey. And that's, you hire people, you got to go through that journey.
Yeah, yeah.
If you were to give an 18-year-old one specific piece of wisdom, what would it be?
You're enough.
And literally, that's 3 words. And I think it's enough to make a massive change in the world.
Yeah.
If people would like to learn more about your programs and about you and your podcast, where can they find out more?
Thank you, Rocky, for that. I'm all over, as we all are, social media. We have a specific page for your show, and it's at my website, SharonSpano.com/richer soul. And on that, we have an assessment around the stages of development, not all 12. We're looking at the 6 that are most prevalent in the workforce. And it's a fun quiz. And we have a report that comes out that will tell you exactly which stage you're at. And it's not as complicated as the assessments that are out there that are very expensive. We tried to make it something more accessible. And again, Sharon Spano.
And we will put that in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I've enjoyed our conversation.
Hey, thanks for checking out the full unedited video of the Richer Soul podcast. You can get the full audio podcast with intro, outro, and a ton more details here on YouTube or whatever your favorite podcast player is. Don't forget, we've got hundreds of episodes for you to go back through, and you can also get episode information on the Richer Soul website as well. Don't forget to subscribe so you're automatically updated as to what's going on and every time we release a new episode. The first few episodes of the Richer Soul podcast actually lay out the entire framework that everything is built on over all of these years. So check them out as well. Thanks for listening.